Before any brand expands into a new market, there's several things they need to consider. The first and most important thing is have they got the time and the resources and the energy to start essentially a new business in a foreign region? Now, what do I mean by that? Well, essentially when you expand your business, what you're doing is starting a new business in a new region. And what happens is that a specific region needs a specific plan. So you need to make sure you've got the time, the resources, the effort and the energy to do all of those things in order to make it work. Because if you don't, what happens is it becomes too difficult and too stressful and you sort of half start it and never quite finish it. So it's really important when you're thinking about expansion to have the right things, the right people, the right resources and the time to enable that to work. And on top of that, understand what your top sellers are or what they might be in the new region by doing things like market research. This is a great question. In fact, this is a question I get asked a lot, essentially or especially when we're speaking in events and conferences. And the reason for that is that it's the sort of the biggest question that we need to master when we talk to with our clients. Here's the things we typically say. When you're thinking of going international, you need to make sure that you've got time, resources and costs all in place. But outside of that, you need to make sure the business has got a strategy, is in a position to be able to grow and has got money to be able to invest in its expansion. So the top thing we need to make sure is there's money to invest in expansion. Well, the biggest mistake brands make isn't just what brands make, it's the mistakes that all companies make. Essentially, they over-leverage. Now, what's over-leveraging? Well, over-leveraging is believing in your product so much that you go out and get money from the bank or a loan to invest in stock. We all know that e-commerce is a cash flow business. We need to sell the stock, get new stock arriving, and there's a big void in cash flow during that period to pay suppliers, to pay the team, to pay ourselves, whatever that might be. And during that period, the number one thing we need to solve is that piece. So for any business, any brand, when they're expanding or building their business, the big thing they need to understand is how to grow sustainably, organically, and at a pace that's right for the brand without it capping out. We saw a huge amount of issues during COVID where brands were rapidly scaling and growing and they took investment on to buy stock. And then what happens is as that stock plateaued and then eventually came down, brands then had large debts they couldn't make and many went redundant. So it's really important that when you're looking to grow sustainably, it's about making sure you've got the cash flow to do it and making sure cash flow is the most important part in the business, which enables the brand to grow sustainably, organically, and effectively last forever. Well, which country first depends on which country you're in. These are the biggest markets we see based on our experience of globally expanding e-commerce brands. The North American market is the biggest, outside of China. The European market is the next biggest region. But each of those countries and regions have their own regions within those. So let's take North America to start with. The three typically most people talk about is the Canadian, the Mexican, plus the United States market. The US market is by far the biggest and most accurate of all of those markets. So if you're in Europe and you want to expand, America is by far the best option as quick as you possibly can. If you're already in the States and you want to expand to a new region, Canada is obviously the next logical region. But there's so many complications with going to Canada. Most people come to Europe first. In Europe, there's 28 countries, and of those 28 countries, you're able to expand pretty much through all of them relatively easily. Now, in my experience, here's the process and what I would do. Number one, the US. Number two, the UK. Number three, Germany. They're my top three places. If you're in one of those and not in the other two, you should be. If you're not in any of those, you should be. So top three, US, United States specifically, not North America, You need US, Germany and the UK, and you can do that in various different orders. The idea of the UK and Germany is that between them they accommodate virtually a third of all e-commerce sales across the whole of Europe. So you might as well start off there. And it does two things. One, it gets you a foothold in the UK in an English-speaking location, presuming you're English-speaking. And secondly, it then gets you a foreign foothold where it gives you the opportunity to start translating things to understand whether that's really something you want to push ahead with longer term. Okay, I mean, there's so many tools out there to enable you to understand market research in new areas. We used to have a complete department focused on market research, but with the introduction of AI software, most of that information can be done in software you're probably already using as an e-com brand. What you really need to understand is the nuances in region. So actually, most of your data can be done by the software you're probably already using in your company. By doing that, you can then get a good gauge of how many sales you might get, volume, perhaps sales volume, revenue size within that. You'll obviously understand the margins broadly of your business already, which will give you an understanding of the margins you would broadly accept or find when you expand your business. But on top of that, there's a number of different things you need to consider. Are your products the right sort of products for those regions? Are those products the right sort of things that are actually going to sell? Obviously, if someone's already selling them, there's a good indication. But also, there's how many people are selling in that market? How many people are actively using that? Is it a dying trend? Is it something that's not going to happen in a year's time? Because by the time you've actually got around to expanding, it will be long gone. So most people, when they're expanding, are expanding with brands that actually people want to buy, not Me Too products. Okay, localization is absolutely one of the most important things you can do for your brand locally. You've got a global brand, think local. When you're thinking local, think big. And the reality is that if your business hasn't put translations on the product, you're not going to sell as many. The truth is that people from Germany will buy a product in German. They won't buy it in English. Same in France. In the UK, if it's got American slang on it, we may shy away from it. You need to make sure that you're localizing your products in the right region to maximize the opportunity. But there's a caveat here, because most businesses I see, what they focus on is mass introduction. And it's at the point where your business becomes big enough that you can start doing that. And localization typically has 3 levels. 1, you can do free translations via AI and everything else. You can do a native tongue language translation is the second step. And the third step is a full sales and marketing step. Now, you can do so many of those things, but when you're first expanding, you just need a local translation done and dusted. Do not worry about trying to optimize every single listing, every single back end, and every single product, because it will just take you too long and you'll never do it. You've got to think speed to market. 80% is better than the last 20%, because what you don't want to do is spend all of your time focusing on localizing the product, only to find it doesn't sell in region. You need to make sure you're spending time on it to be effective, but not to lose time taking it to the market. So localization is a key ingredient that's focused on actually driving success when you land your business in a new region. But ultimately, you need to make sure that you're not spending too much time on it and you never actually expand in the first place. So shipping and fulfillment is always going to be cheapest from region. And what I mean by that is, if you're selling in the UK here, then actually fulfilling from the UK is always going to be cheaper. Fulfilling from the UK to Australia or to the US is not cheap. The same from fulfilling from the US to the UK and Australia isn't cheap. Having fulfillment in region is the fastest way and the cheapest way to manage that and to make sure that you're maximising on those. The downside to that is you need to have goods in region, which increases your 3PL costs. There's a real delicate balance on speed to market, and the faster the buyer gets your product, the more sales you're going to get. The second thing is increasing your costs from a 3PL perspective. But the fourth thing is decreasing your shipping costs in region. And they're the little factors that you're pulling on the whole time to know whether you're pulling the right levers or not to make sure it's going to work. My typical answer is, in order to start seeing if your products will work, just start selling them into new regions from your website. If people start buying them, you know you've got demand. But ultimately, you're never going to get anywhere near as much demand as you are unless it's being fulfilled in region in the relevant currency, and that's the secret part, the relevant currency to get it into someone within 24 or 48 hours. Yeah, so great question we typically get asked is, how are you going to deal with my returns? First off, your returns need to come back to a local address. The returns need to be local, so if you're selling in Germany, they need to go back to Germany. Sending returns cross-border is very, very difficult. So our recommendation is to have returns locally to local hubs and then bring them back from there. Now, depending on the returns, it's going to depend on what you want to do with it. How are you going to grade them? How are you going to make sure they're ready to be sold again? In fact, what platforms are you going to sell them on once they have been returned? And depending on the grade that comes back, where might you sell them? But ultimately, when you're expanding into new regions, you need to have the ability to get returns back into a local 3PL. And having a 3PL, or it could be your own warehouse, but you need to have the ability to get stock returned locally in region. So when businesses expand, first thing I say is, from where are you selling at the moment is where you want to sell when you expand. So for example, if you're selling on Amazon, then you might as well use Amazon's marketplace in the country that you're expanding to as a starting point. If you're selling on your own website via Shopline or Shopify, again, you can sell on those platforms in the market. There's advantages to both, right? The truth is that Amazon will bring you traffic, but it's competitive. Your website won't bring you traffic, but there's no one to compete with. You have to balance out those pros and cons on what's right. But typically when you expand into a new region, the businesses that I see that succeed do it in 4 places. They have their own website, they have a marketplace that's large, typically Amazon. They thirdly have a returns website, marketplace, most of our clients use eBay, and then they have one other. So what's the key one in each area? One of the questions could be, in the UK, could be OnBuy. When you go to Germany, it could be Otto or Real, could be Zalando or CD Discount or Bowl in other parts of Europe. But you typically need 4, don't overcomplicate it. So it's your own website, it's Amazon or the significant marketplace, it's eBay to sell your returns through at the moment. That is changing via Facebook Marketplace, TikTok and other places. And then lastly, what's the biggest marketplace in the region that will give you additional support to sell your products faster in the region? I mean, the biggest ones that most people use are Shopify, Shopline, Amazon, eBay. Those will all be able to give you the advantage of being able to expand into multiple countries in multiple currencies at the click of a button, relatively straightforward. So when you're expanding, those marketplaces become very easy, those platforms become very simple. And it's about how you can maximize each of those to make that work. The disadvantage of Shopline, Shopify, something like that, is you need a different URL. You can do it on .com, but ultimately in order to maximize your SEO, you might want .co.uk for the UK, you might want .de for Germany, you might want .fr for France. But all of those things will enable people to do that. The clients I see that succeed have those URLs specifically. They're the ones that are able to maximize the SEO according to what they need and to maximize the opportunity when they're expanding overseas. But all of those typically will give you the ability to be able to expand both from a click of a button and a currency perspective. Compliance is probably one of the most complicated areas that most businesses think about when they're expanding. And compliance is difficult because you've got business tax, you've got cross-border tax, you've got regional tax, you've got local taxes, you've got personal taxes. All of those things are going to have an impact on how you expand into that region. So it's about working with partners that understand those compliance rules and regulations in each country to give you the best advice and the best support to make sure that you're finding that you're not putting yourself in the wrong situation, both selling in that region or cross-border out.